Are you doing laid back law today?
I am not. How about you?
I don't know. It's whether I get out of jury selection in the morning, Rub it in. Rub it in.
Aruba. We need pigs.
Who goes to Aruba? I mean, Pat Clifton and the other angry dog. Hey, good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. We made it through another week of Law and Legitimacy. What's going on down there in North Carolina, Mike?
Other angry dog said this is his 27th year going to Aruba. I mean, imagine the success in life, right? Where you're 27 years strong going to Aruba. I love that. I love that.
That is successful, although I just never having been to Aruba once, the first 26, the 26 trips seems like, one trip seems like a lot, 20, and then 27 seems like 26 too many. I don't know. What's the appeal of Aruba? Somebody tell me.
Hey, man, he says he's friendly with a lot of the locals, and so I imagine he's just got sort of a second family down there, a nice community. That's really probably what it's about. Let him tell the story, though, but that's what I imagine.
That works. I enjoy it. So, I did a radio show earlier this morning and looked at the legal terrain and thought, oh, today might be a good day to take a day off, but chose not to. What we talked about there was the sort of tawdriness of the Donald Trump case and Juan Merchan being caught in the headlights. He was calling balls and strikes, and Trump's team let in all this tawdry information about Donald's affair with Stormy, and then asked for a mistrial, and the judge shot back saying, where were your objections? And so I think score one for Juan Merchan, not being an activist judge, being the umpire, give a demerit to Donald's lawyer. Information introduced to the jury. Why weren't you objecting? Asking for a mistrial once you've opened the door to damaging information isn't necessarily a good look. So, Donald's lawyers have been doing a decent job, but not so much with respect to Stormy. But
I heard a theory advanced on another law show, I don't think as widely listened to as it should be. But the theory was that perhaps Trump's legal team is actually aiming in this case for a mistrial. Could that be the case?
No, because you can't have it if you invite the very thing you complain about. How do you get a mistrial? So, for example, all that's relevant in the Stormy Daniels case, it seems to me, is that Donald and she had an affair, and this would have of some sort that was embarrassing potentially either to him and his family, that would be the defense claim, or would be damaging to his presidential campaign. That would be the people of New York's claim. And as a result of this embarrassing relationship, Donald made payments and mischaracterized the payments in public documents. That's the case. The mechanics of the relationship doesn't matter. If she spanked him with Time Magazine or National Geographic, who cares? Who cares what position they took as they assumed the libidinal position? And so, I think Merchan sat with a growing sense of unease as these questions were put before the jury, and wondered whether there was some reason why the Trump team didn't object. And when the Trump team asked for a mistrial, he basically said, where were you? If you didn't want this information in the jury, it's really got nothing to do with the case. It's just salacious and distracting. Why didn't you object? Now, a trial, I've only judged mock trial competitions for law students, and sometimes for undergraduates, and even sometimes for high school students. And it's very interesting to sit as a judge and wonder just what in the world the litigants in front of you are thinking. And I have to imagine that that's also the case in quote unquote real courtrooms. The parties bring cases and controversies to court. They identify legal theories that either entitle them to relief or to defeat their adversaries' claims for relief. And then they use the code of evidence and the code of civil procedure or criminal procedure, depending on the courtroom, to sculpt the proceedings. It's an adversarial and not an inquisitorial proceeding in the United States, which means it is driven by the parties, not the court. And so I think Mershon's hands were tied. He may well have had a pretty good sense of what he thought was relevant and material for the proceedings. But when the parties expanded the playing field beyond what he thought was relevant material, it wasn't his job to object on behalf of one party or the other. So I think that if Trump's team was aiming for a mistrial, they're not going to get it. This is in the theory of something called invited error. You opened this door. You permitted a witness to walk through it. You invited the witness to walk through it. And now you're complaining about the walk. I think if this was planning for a mistrial, it was poor planning and poor lawyering. That's my view.
Well, I have to admit, I've kind of reached my limit on how much I care about her testimony.
Yeah, me too. So let's move on. And that's the other piece of this with respect to all the Trump trials. It's suddenly outliving its shelf life. And you know what? Maybe that's good, because in the end, when Donald is done, there's a country to live in and a life to live and commitments to make and communities to build. And it could be that all this Donald saturation in his various trials does what campaigning doesn't do. It gives us our fill of Donald and his trouble. What's going on in Shenandoah?
You actually sent this this story to me this morning. I find it interesting, so I'll put it up, the Axios story here on the screen just for reference. But Shenandoah County in Virginia, back in 2020, it made a move to remove names from certain public education institutions, namely Stonewall Jackson High School, and then I think Ashby Lee Elementary, and replace them with, I think, at least in the in the Ashby Lee case, they renamed it to Honey Run Elementary, and then I believe Stonewall Jackson was Mountain View High School, turned into Mountain View High School. So the school board there in Shenandoah County has voted to essentially reverse that decision made in 2020, and those original names, Stonewall Jackson High School, Ashby Lee Elementary, will return. So I guess that's the broad headline. The picture on the screen, I think, is really interesting. It's less about the names themselves and more about, I think, the physical placement of the names back in the public consciousness and what that means, I think, in this day and age of that is so fraught with controversy and is I guess is identified by how racist things are in modern America. Norman, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know what I think about all this. The two things came to mind when I saw this story this morning. First was three things. First was the concept of a moral panic. Second, the concept of what goes on in a pandemic. And third, the notion of a pendulum. And what am I talking about? Obviously, not obvious. I mean, for you and I, Mike, this was the first pandemic of a global proportion that we lived through. And with any luck, it'll be the last and only one. But those who take a longer view of history, Professor Christakis at Yale, I think it's called Times Arrow, write about the effect of pandemics on societies, that when a society is overcome with fear and the sort of terror that a pandemic produces, some sort of broad-scale illness that cannot be combated easily and effectively, it does things to a society. It yields a sense of moral panic. It yields a sense that the wheels have come off society, and it causes people, in effect, to look for reasons for why the pandemic has occurred, moral reasons within the control of history. And it may well be that there are such reasons. It may well be that they're not. It may well be that whatever the cause of the panic, and I'm just not going to play conspiracy theory today. I'm not going to say it was the Wuhan lab. I'm not going to call it the China virus. I'm simply going to note that a number of people fell ill and died, and our governments responded in a variety of ways to that public health crisis. And as a result of that public health crisis and the fear, ordinary people sought to look for the causes of this fear, the causes of this illness, not just within themselves, but within their societies and communities. And so it's not surprising that in the United States, race was seized upon as a cause of our dis-ease. And I want people to listen carefully, because I'm not saying that anybody said that racism caused the panic. Racism didn't open the door to the Wuhan virus. But what we found was that we were a society ill at ease, looking to live a better life, and we seized upon certain obvious factors in our national experience, such as our inconvenient and unsettled history with race. And the result was there was something like a moral panic, an overdetermined reaction to racial reality in the United States. Thus, I would say of the George Floyd case, George peddling a counterfeit 20 at a convenience store, cops call, investigate, they seek to detain him and investigate him. They detain him on film and he dies, and suddenly the world erupts and everything is systemic racism. And so all of the anxiety that we had about the pandemic and what to do about it suddenly gets displaced into something we can, quote unquote, do something about: systemic racism. So we go through the great public display of removing statutes that embed the history of this racism, in effect trying to remake our history substantially to make ourselves feel better as moral agents as we face this unnamed terror. I have a hunch, and this is my first take on this topic, Mike, publicly or privately. I have a hunch that looking back, something like this will be the story of our time, because something like this is the story often of times of social disease. There's a fascinating book about what caused the Salem witch trials. In other words, how did people in Salem come to conclude that witches were bewitching young people in the community, and that there needed to be a wholesale inquisition to eradicate witches? The community of Salem was on the border, on the frontier of Western culture and Indian uprisings, Indian dislocation. And there was a great deal of fear of other, a great deal of terror, a great deal of anxiety about people's sense of well-being in the world in the town of Salem. And is it any surprise that collectively they fastened on a way to solve it? That is, eradicate the witches. And within a few short years, they repented, as it were. They turned back from that effort and realized that the sort of legal proceedings that they found justified during the Salem witch trials, the use of so-called spectral evidence that only some people could see but others couldn't, generally not admissible in a courtroom, even Judge Juan Merchan's courtroom. It's no surprise that they turned their back on that and repudiated their efforts. And it would seem to me that with respect to the Stonewall Jackson statute and the effort to address the problem of statuary in our public communities, what we might be seeing now is a release of the grip of the pandemic's sense of moral panic and hysteria. We do have we do have a problem with racism in the United States. It's obvious, and what to do about it is far from obvious. How to build a better society is far from obvious. But it seems to me that restoring historic monuments to their places in our communities is not a return to racism. It's probably a return to a sense of common history. It's probably a return to a sense of common sense. And, Ken, I for one welcome the move. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, Mike.
No, I certainly do. I'm reminded of the point that you made when we were talking. This is some months ago, and it wasn't an isolated occasion. You've said it here, you've said it on in other forums as well. But the proposition that after the Civil War, well, let me start by saying we are still charging and prosecuting individuals in connection with their presence at the Capitol in D.C. on January 6th, 2021. And I was reading even earlier this week an article that was talking about the overwhelming percentage of the total number of criminal defendants that have been charged in the last 2 years alone, even in the first 5 months of 2024, and it's staggering. The proposition that you advanced to our listeners and to me, that made me think very critically, is that by the end of at the end of the Civil War, um, that we were not still looking to exact some level of justice or vengeance on those that had taken the side of the Confederacy. Do you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So the January 6th phenomena is surprising to me. Is it related to the pandemic? History unfolds over time, and it's going to take a longer view to put that event in perspective and the prosecutions of it in perspective. As regular listeners know, I represented Joe Biggs of the Proud Boys in the seditious conspiracy trial that lasted 5.5 months. I'm still trying to recover financially from that case. I have a front row seat on that case, and I'm glad that I do. Here's the thing that stuns me: I am unaware, after sitting through that case, of any plan to storm the Capitol and any plan to take control of government. I'm unaware that the feds provoked it. I'm unaware that the Proud Boys did. I've read the January 6th House Committee report. I represented some witnesses before the House Committee. I've participated in the trial. Here's what I think was going on in 2020. A contested election, a sense of illegitimacy in the land. Donald Trump refusing to accept the results of an election because many Americans could not accept the results of a changing country. And he cooked up a theory that the election had been stolen and pursued campaign irregularities in 60-some courts, failing in all but one or two of them conclusively and decisively and immediately. But yet he continued with his rhetoric of a stolen election and went to the Capitol on January 6th and encouraged people under the umbrella of a variety of legal theories, including alternative electorates, to get Mike Pence to delay the count. When it didn't happen, people at the scene snapped, and there was a riot, and the riot turned violent. And the riot resulted not in all that much property damage, if you think about it. I've been reading plea agreements with the J6 defendants. The most recent one I've read is one that I'll enter into with the government next Friday in D.C. in a case involving a Kentucky man named Dan Wilson. The total damage to the Capitol for this insurrection was about $3 million, which, if you think about it, is next to nothing, given how much it cost to replace a window, let's say, at the Capitol. So what we had was a spontaneous riot, and it's been now prosecuted for 3.5 years as though this were an invasion of the Capitol by a foreign power, and that foreign power needs to be deterred from doing so again, and justice needs to be exacted in what I will refer to as sometimes savage forms, years incarceration for nominal conduct. I believe that, and it's with a heavy heart that I approach these prosecutions. You contrast this with the Civil War, and to me, it's stunning. Some 3 years after a civil war that tore the country apart, there were battles. 600,000 Americans lost their lives in these conflicts. 3 years after the Civil War, almost every rebel had been repatriated. And the country went back to the business of building a national economy under the Reconstruction Amendments, which empowered the national government in a way it had not been empowered prior to the Civil War. To me, that's an amazing story. And when I contrast the era of recovery after the Civil War with the era of recrimination after a riot on January 6th, there's just something that doesn't fit. And I don't know what accounts for that. I expect that even into the election season in 2024 and thereafter, we will still be prosecuting people for their role on January 6th. We wouldn't have done that in the 19th century. And, Mike, I don't have an answer as to why we're doing that. I just note that we are with a real sense of
Yeah. So why we're doing that, I'll first note that I think it's embarrassing and it's undignified. But I think that me saying that it's embarrassing and it's undignified isn't isolated to my thoughts about the administration of our institutions um, uh, in the federal, Department of Justice context. I am in a position as a practitioner where I have to engage with the government on a daily basis, state, federal, local. And as a country, we are in a very strange place. I can assure you that. And what strikes me about the continued prosecutions of January 6th defendants into 2024 is that there is some sense among those who are within the institutions that this is, I guess, morally right, or even if they don't feel as though it's morally right, it's a continuation of the expectation that they not announce any sort of dissent. The fact that it seems as though it's a freight train that can't be stopped, right? That it's on a one-way track is amazing to me. That even why is it that we have to wait for a changing of the guard within the Department of Justice in between presidential administrations for us to expect some sort of enlightenment or some sort of discretion or change of mind or some sort of, hindsight analysis that feels a little more like what you just articulated, Norm? That, at what point have we uh, stood up a reaction to this that is worse than what we claim to be prosecuting, right?
No, I get it. And
that is why people in the chat now are asking about the catalyst for the riots to begin with, right? The fact is, if the federal government's reaction to January 6th was more measured and more targeted and more rational from the outside, these issues related to conspiracy theories or widespread interest in the federal involvement potentially in January 6th. And we talked about that, so I don't want to get down a rabbit hole. But what I'm saying is that there seems to be either a conscious or an unconscious effort being made within our institutions. I think about the Federal Trade Commission. The chair of the Federal Trade Commission is basically my age, has never practiced law, and wrote a paper that got her appointed by President Biden to the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, that commission that is responsible for the administration of antitrust law, rulemaking that regulates private markets and what we regard as our capitalist system. And that body just outlawed non-competes at the federal level. I mean, imagine what that actually looks like in the grand scheme. Is anybody really that, I guess, what's the question I'm trying? Do we believe that somebody is just that sort of motivated? Or is it really that it's just sheer incompetence across the board? I feel like I'm more on the Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged side of things when it comes to an explanation of what's going on than on the more conspiratorial-minded 1984 side of things, that it's Big Brother did it. I just don't give these people that much credit, Norm, because I deal with the people that are responsible for administering this stuff at every level on a day-to-day basis in varying different fields. These are not impressive people. And if you stop treating them as impressive, you will see it in a different way that is a little more manageable and gives you a little more control in your personal life. And I'm not soapboxing anybody, but I want to make sure that as we get on these topics in this stream, we're not constantly battling this narrative from our viewers and kind of feeding the beast that is this desire to talk about conspiracies and talk about, one world government stuff. I understand that at the top levels that there are people that want to see things happen in a very certain way and have interests that are guarded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By and large, however, the people that are advancing a lot of these things, even the attorneys that have been described as very impressive in internal discussions with, people working on the cases in January 6th, it just doesn't seem to me like there's any sort of broad awareness of what is being compromised through these actions, through these various actions. We've talked about the Federal Trade Commission. We're talking about this. And so I think bottom line here, I know I'm rambling. Bottom line here is that the Shenandoah School Board has done a great thing in reversing the decisions of 2020.
Why is it great?
Because it's a signal, it's a bellwether for everybody else that there is still some group of people that are willing to be rational, and to make decisions in the interest of their community, and to not do certain things simply out of fear of losing their position in the community.
But
right?
suppose you're a Black Lives Matter activist living in the shadow of this statute. Do you feel that progress has been retarded or has been reversed, that a momentum that went in favor of inclusion and recognition of hate and hateful treatment of people on the basis of their skin color, do you feel that somehow this is a reversal? Or, what is the Black Lives Matter activist who celebrated the removal of this statute to think of its return? And I ask because I want to live. The objective, folks, in this show is not to. Obviously, we want clicks and we want viewers, but we're not part of the institutional rage machine. We're trying to build a consensus and a community in which everyone lives. So if I'm on the Shenandoah Board of Commissioners or whatever it is that voted this back, and a BLM activist comes to my door and says,
here's my response to that.
What do I say to that person?
You don't get what you want because you cry about it. That's
but
that's how this is all
about it. But you cry out about it, injustice.
Okay. Except for the fact that nothing. Okay, we've seen the scam that Black Lives Matter as an organization has been revealed to be, right? And those responsible for it. There is no consensus. There are two conclusions being made on the George Floyd point, right? In terms of in specifically with the way that he died, and the medical examiner's reports, the competing reports, etc. What people see are the political opportunism embedded in the media's portrayal of certain events. And what we are watching are politically motivated people who have their own coalitions advancing the causes that they think will make them the most money politically. And there is no check on that. The problem is that our justice system is not in a position now to keep up with how fast things occur in our society based on social media and based on the internet. So the delay of justice is an actual injustice in and of itself, right? So the Black Lives Matter stuff, taking to the streets or whatever, those riots in the summer of 2020, Norm, people will never forget. People my age especially. I remember when people were getting, castigated and pilloried for not putting a black box on their social media avatar profile pic, right? I mean, I'm not so old to forget that. What I think you say to somebody in that position is that, we're allowed to have competing ideas. And just because you cry about something and deface something and act in a certain way doesn't mean that you get what you want.
So I want to scale it back a little bit. I want to be the Black Lives Matter activist and say, yes, certain people on behalf of Black Lives Matter behaved the way all people do, and they behaved unjustly. They arrogated unto themselves profit. They misused money, and they were opportunists. I agree with that. But as a general matter in society, there is inequality based on race. And for a brief moment, I felt as a being that hypothetical Black Lives Matter activist, that the country was watching and paying attention to the need to address systematic problems. And I was encouraged. And when I look at this statute's return, I wonder whether this represents a retreat from a commitment to equal justice. Does it?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because justice is not a monolith. And justice is not something that you project your temporal standards and preferences onto in view of a very long and arcing history of the United States of America. Right.
So every one of these public events, I think, I don't know that we want quote unquote truth and reconciliation commissions in the United States. I don't want struggle sessions, but I want discussions. I know that in 2020, I was outraged as I sat isolated in my home in the pandemic and watched mostly peaceful protests that turned into riots. I know that on January 6th of 2021, a friend called me and said, look at the coup. And I didn't pay any attention to it. I viewed it as just a nominal riot. But what I've noticed, Mike, is that these public events quickly become encoded in a sort of zero-sum rhetorical exchange. I had a very interesting conversation with somebody the other day about a political party, I think the Working Families Party. And, and I'm like, well, who are they? And I was somewhat dismissive and came to understand that this is a group designed to advance concerns about working families. One of them being to require employers to provide paid sick leave. And, all at once I felt a sense of hopefulness about politics in the United States. I mean, not that I want to be compelled to infinitely pay paid sick leave as a small employer. That would be a hardship. But I know as a small employer, I've always offered the women in my firm unlimited maternity leave. If a young lawyer or a young employee of my firm becomes pregnant, I tell them, take maternity leave, return when you're ready. Bringing a human being into the world is the most significant act you will ever take. And so I thought, that's politics, not standing around bitching and moaning about a statute or about what happened in 1691. And so I'm looking at the return of these statutes as an occasion to engage in a meaningful conversation with those who supported their removal about how best to build a community in which we both choose to live. Because I'm aching for that discussion, and part of me wants to poke, and part of me wants to prod, and part of me wants to throw fire bombs because that's fun and it's entertaining. But I want more than entertainment in life. I want enrichment,
Yeah, and how human of me to how human of me to want my get back for being told that that I was literally killing people for making my own medical decisions, or for rejecting the idea that the America that I grew up in was a racist place, or that I couldn't find common ground with people that I've known for 20 years, right? Or even longer than that. I mean, forgive me for looking at our elected leaders sitting there, their skinny necks in their collared shirts and ties, lying through their teeth, and restricting my movement, restricting the movement of my clients, restricting the movement of my family, coercing and telling people that they needed to hunker down and we're all in this together. I had a general counsel of an administrative agency lie to me on the phone. And when I basically revealed that she was lying right to me about a case that I was working on during the pandemic, she had the nerve to say, we really all are in this together. Except for the fact that the only people who were guaranteed their income, their salaries, their benefits, et cetera, were those that were working in government positions. And it's funny how that works. So forgive me, Norm, for not being as civil or as patient or as disciplined with what I would want to say to people. I don't have.
But I mean, and I encourage you.
We have absolutely lost historical memory in this country, and that presupposes that most people ever had a basis from which to work in an educational capacity and in some sort of academic capacity. The problem that we have today is the virality of the internet and the stupidity or the ignorance of the untrained masses in our public education institutions.
But here's what's happening: you're losing me. You're getting into that Dan Bongino mode that just sort of, just is sort of talking at me and not helping me build a better world. And so I get it.
I have far more no disrespect, Norm. I'm not, but I have far more years to go. And I have children that I am just bringing into the world, right? These aren't things that I can sit around and again, I'm not saying this out of disrespect, and I'm not trying to insult you, but there are two. You and I see the world from two very different vantage points and two different horizons, right? And there is a lot still to do in my world. And
I'm trying to help you get it done. I'm trying to help you get it done by suggesting that behind the rhetoric there are interests, and there has to be a way to cut through the rhetoric to work on common interests.
And that's why my day job is as a practitioner and not as a political talking head or just doing a show only. And again, I'm not sitting here trying to throw jabs at you, Norm, or throw jabs at anybody else, but there is a dynamic between the two of us. It's that we actually get up every morning, we do this show, but then we also go and represent real clients in the real world, right? And there is a huge distinction to be made between those that read through every single case, read through every single opinion. Some of the criticism that you and I get, Norm, is that, we don't spend enough time looking at other people's shows and stuff like that. And yes, Janet, I am referencing your comment that you made yesterday, and I think it's a
What you say? I didn't miss it.
well,
I
I
missed
think it's a fair criticism, but it's ultimately that there are other channels out there that we could use as sort of a basis to, come to certain conversations about, topical issues in a more educated or prepared fashion. And I don't think there was any disrespect intended. But what I'm saying is that, my passion right now is informed by the fact that at any given time, I've got clients that are being rolled over by law enforcement agencies, administrative agencies that are struggling with planning and zoning commissions, etc. Right. And when I go to remedy these situations in a way that is not first inviting a lawsuit against a city, I am met consistently with a standard of incompetence that is representative of a larger problem, Norm. And so when I am passionate about what young people need to be talking about, or when I am highly critical of I guess the more patient approach to this, and when I say, forgive me for not being as patient with it, the reality is this: millennials and Gen Zs, we got to get up off our ass, man. We don't have a ton of time to spend politicking over this. I mean, we have got to shore up the gaps in our own competence across every single domain: medicine, law, economics, banking, finance, the blue collar industries, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, HVAC. The issue is that we have a highly educated demographic of millennials and Gen Z, and we are severely underutilized, and we are unfulfilled because of that reason. And that lack of fulfillment creates moral depravity. It creates that sort of devil's hands, idle hands, or the devil's workshop kind of thing. That to me is representative of our current crisis in America.
Janet Smith, Norm, you'd better start getting in touch with politics and pop culture. Get it done based on reading more widely will advance your cause. Well, Janet, I'm probably a lost cause. I read as widely as a busy law practice permits. And perhaps it's not widely enough, and I certainly don't pay enough attention.
Janet, that's my job. Norm brings something specific here, so the criticism should be leveled at me, and I'll get you better prepared, Norm.
All right. Well, listen, folks, we've talked our way through another week of of whatever it is we're doing, and I sense from the comments that folks are far more interested and sympathetic to Mike's point of view than mine these days, and I'll take the criticism. Maybe it'll be Mike and Norm as opposed to Norm and Mike at some point, or maybe Mike will go off on his own and leave the old man behind.
What are you trying to tell me right now? I'm just kidding.
That you're doing well, that you're
I think I've got the easier side, man. I really do, but that's the way I feel about it. It takes tremendous courage to come onto a stream and say that you're open to being convinced or persuaded along the lines of something like a hate speech exception to the First Amendment. I'm too dumb to even consider how to do that, Norm. So
Janet Schmidt says, read smarter than. Janet, I probably read as much as anybody I know, at least as a practicing lawyer. I'll do my best not to disappoint you, but I promise one thing. I'll call it the way I see it every time, regardless of its impact. So, welcome back, everybody. Have a great Mother's Day. Have a great weekend. Spring is springing, and, off we go. Mike, how do people find us?
We're right here on all the platforms that you care about: X, YouTube, and over on Rumble. You should subscribe to us at LawPod Daily. Use the hashtag AMFYoYo when you comment, because I know you're going to like this stream and you're going to comment on it before you share it with somebody that is not subscribed or has heard of LawPod Daily. We're here every day, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. You can also find our episodes uploaded audio-only form to all the podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, Overcast, Audible, wherever you find premium podcasts. I'm looking forward to Monday. Did you decide whether you're going to do laid back law, Norm, here while we were talking?
So I'm in day 5 of jury selection in a murder case in Connecticut. We've got 10 jurors after 4 days, and we've got another week set for jury selection. I don't know if we'll take an early lunch break or not, but I will certainly be on laid back law at 1. Whether I get on beforehand remains to be seen. That's Eric Huntley and his crew. we're trying to build out a broader base for our podcast here so that hopefully we can monetize this and develop an income stream and become better readers of other things. My objective obviously is to spend more time commenting and less time in court. But right now I'm in court plenty. So I don't know what I'll be doing today. I've got a murder case I expect to win. The defense is self-defense. It's an honest defense, and we're looking for honest jurors, and we're doing a good job getting them. I want to compliment Jim Nugent, my co-counsel, and I. We're having a good time. It's always a pleasure to try a case with Jim. However, it's always bracing to walk into a courtroom when you've got determined prosecutors to put your client in jail for the rest of his life. It is a very surreal experience, because one thing that happens in the practice of law is, as you get to know your client, his cause becomes your own, and a species of love grows in regard. And so I sit next to a man who was involved in a violent shooting one night during a struggle. I think the law is on his side. The jury will decide. And if we win, obviously, we'll be elated. If we lose, we'll be crushed. And that is the walk of a criminal defense lawyer. You're all in every day in every case. And sometimes you're crushed and sometimes you're not. The challenge is to remain human through it all. And some days it's a bigger challenge than others.
Well, good luck to you and to Jim. I'm reminded of the long form that we did with Jim a while back on, oddly enough, jury selection and the I think the concept of the vanishing trial. So I think Jim, like you, is one of the one of a dying breed, right? One of the active litigators that has done a tremendous amount of litigating in their career. And I think, one way or another, I'll probably be dragged into a life of a litigator before I retire. So we'll see. But Norm, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being here. And thank you to all of you. AMF Yo-Yo. We'll see you on Monday morning, 8 a.m.
AMF.
See you, Norm.